Okay, so I'm going to talk about etymology. Etymology is the study of the origin, derivation of particular words. And I'm going to see if I can relate that to culture, the way that words that share a common derivation reflect something of a common culture. And then, of course, in the whole of this course, we'll be relating what we know about etymology specifically to the origin of particular food words, which will allow us to see some of the ways that common food has been passed from one language to another language, which tells us something about trading and contact between particular groups of people. Okay, so what is etymology exactly? As I said, it's the study of the origin of words and the way in which their meanings have changed throughout history. The word itself, etymology, comes from two words. So you can see there the Greek word etymon, which refers to the true sense. Although when we talk about etymology, we don't talk about true sense, we're talking about derivation. And the suffix logia, of course, means the study of. So when we talk about an etymon now, in English, we refer to it as the source, not the true sense, but the source of a word, a given word. For example, and we'll talk about this a little later, the Latin word frate is the derivation, the source for the word brother in friar, I should say, friar in English. There are two meanings, of course, a brother, but the actual word friar comes from frate. Okay, so when we look at etymology, we look at different particular ways of looking at the way language has changed from different perspectives, from different linguistic perspectives, from the perspectives of phonology, morphology, semantics, and syntax. And we look at these in terms of their historical changes. So what I'm talking about now is sometimes called historical linguistics. And that is composed of these particular elements. So historical phonology, and if you look at the word phonology, you'll see that logi there, which means study of. And the first part there, phones, means sound, so the study of the sound system. Morphology is the study of morphs, or little bits of words that attach themselves to other words. So for example, ly is a morpheme which is attached to make an adverb. S is a morpheme that's attached to a noun to make a plural, etc. And then semantics, of course, is the meaning of words and how meanings of words change over time. Syntax refers to the order of words. In English, we have a specific word or order of subject, verb, and object or complement. Other languages have different word orders, but English is what we call an SVO language. And then, of course, there are other non-linguistic influences on the development of words, which is part of the cultural and intellectual history of any particular language. Okay, so let's have a look at each of those items individually. So the first one, historical phonology, and one of the most important names in historical phonology has been Jacob Grimm. You're probably more familiar with Jacob Grimm as the author with his brother, the Brothers Grimm, of a collection of fairy stories. The Brothers Grimm's intentions at that time was to kind of collect a series of folk tales which would represent what it was to be German, because at that time Germany was divided into many different particular countries and principalities, and so by identifying a common language and the language which is used to tell these fairy stories, it could be used as a way of promoting a certain pride in that language and a pride in the notion of a nation, of the nation of Germany. Anyway, what we're more interested in is Jacob Grimm's work in terms of historical phonology, and what he established was a theory of sound shift, historical sound shift, and you can see that expressed in that box at the bottom. But just to take one example of it, and that's at the top there, you have a division between non-Germanic cognates. Cognates refer to a word which is the same in more than one language. So when you're learning a language, one of the great things that help you are words you can identify as being the same in English. So, for example, if you look at, say, the Latin for foot, which is pes, pedis, and you can also look at those other words there in Sanskrit, Ancient Greek, and Lithuanian. Notice they all begin with a p sound. Okay. Well, he noted that there was a sound shift with Germanic languages, the family of Germanic families, which of course English is part of. So you get the p going to the f sound. So the Latin pes pedis changes to fut, and then you can see in the other Germanic languages also a change to the f sound, and all those changes they're summarized in that particular box at the bottom there. So you get some of the sounds there. And then IE refers to Indo-European, which is the larger grouping of languages, of the non-Germanic languages, and how that changed in terms of Germanic languages. Okay, so the next particular element that historical linguists look at is morphology. Okay, so if you look at that picture there, you'll see that there are two oxen. Okay, one ox, two oxen. So that particular en or n is historically a very old plural marker, and it was used a lot in earlier English. Originally, you didn't talk about having two shoes, you talk about two schoen, and that was the plural of shoe. In the same way, hausen was the plural form of house. Of course, we don't use that anymore. We use the plural marker s, but you can still see some remnants of that. Oxen is one. Think of brother and brethren, man, men, woman, women, and of course child, children. So those are kind of irregular plurals that have survived, but the main morpheme, of course, for plurals is still s. The next element in historical linguistics is semantics, and if you look at the picture there, you'll see that this is a picture of a guy called Guy Fawkes, and the word guy originates from this particular real historical figure. He was a terrorist. He wanted to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and he organized a plot, and he smuggled barrels of gunpowder into the basement of the Houses of Parliament in England, in London, and fortunately he was caught, and the date of that was November the 5th, 1605. Ever since then, a very, very popular holiday celebration in England is the burning of an effigy of Guy Fawkes on what's called bonfire night. So what happens is that people build big bonfires and they set them afire, and then they bring out an effigy of Guy Fawkes. Kids have been making these effigies every November the 5th, or before that. They usually find some old clothes, stuff it with newspapers and things, stick it in a stroller, and then walk round and ask for a penny for the guy, and that's how they collect money to buy fireworks. Anyway, on November the 5th, the effigy of Guy Fawkes is thrown onto the fire in remembrance of the day that he fortunately failed to blow up the Houses of Parliament. Since then, of course, the term guy was used to refer to a person of grotesque appearance. But that changed, of course, especially in the United States in the 19th century, and it began to refer to any man. Some guy called for you. And of course, we're not referring to some grotesque guy, but just a guy. And then, of course, more recent change is, of course, that in the plural, guys, it can be used for both genders. So come on, you guys could be directed to a group of men and women. It's kind of similar to a plural you used in the South, you all, to distinguish you all from you, singular you. Okay, so the next element of historical linguistics is historical syntax. So here's a line from a poem by Christopher Marlowe. This is a very romantic poem. And he says, "Whoever loved that loved not at first sight." It's a question, and he's kind of saying that, well, you know, if it's real love, it must have been at first sight. And notice where the negative is, loved not at first sight. We don't talk like that now. That's kind of the language of poetry. And that marks a change in syntax. So now we'd use the auxiliary did plus not. Whoever loved that did not love at first sight. And I'll let you read the poem there, because it is a very romantic poem. Okay, next up is non-linguistic influences on changes in language. And here's a nice example. This is from the 1990s, and this refers to a judge in Florida. And he had a case come up in front of him, and it was a topless hot dog vendor, Terry Cortina. And he found Terry Cortina not guilty of indecent exposure. The judge read the law aloud, okay? And the law, as he read it, stipulated that it is illegal, quote, for any person to expose or exhibit his sexual organs, unquote. Notice the way that's written. That was written in the language of the time, where the plural male marker, possessive, his, was supposed to refer to his or her. But it wasn't stipulated as his or her. The default reading, the default choice was to use the male marker rather than the female one, okay? Which reflects a certain kind of sexism. And so what he was doing was pointing out that, you know, this was the rules up until the 1990s, but society's changed. We don't, we can't tolerate his referring to males and females. We'd have to say his or her. So Zach concluded, "I don't think this lady has male sexual organs. I have no choice but to release her." And that marked a kind of change in the way society thought about sexism and how it appeared in language. So let's have a look at an example. Look at an example of how etymologies are written. And going back to the word friar, okay? So if you look at the first part there, it says PIE, P-I-E. P-I-E refers to Proto-Indo-European language. So this is not a language that actually existed. It's a language which we think existed. If you buy into the idea that in certain parts of the world there is a one language from which other language derived, then you can speculate that what that language consisted of. So linguists have kind of created what they think is this original language from which other languages in the Indo-European area of the world were derived. So that's why it's called PIE, Proto-Indo-European. So the little asterisk is referring to the fact that this is what we think the word was, not what we know it was. So there was a word called brate, which became brother, which means brother, which then, notice the way the arrows pointing was then changed, then in Latin became frate, and then in Old French frère, or brother. Also, and notice then that it has two meanings. In French it has two meanings. It's the your sibling or a member of a religious order of brothers. So in Middle English, the frère became friar. Okay, and then modern English, the word friar was established. Okay, so what that tells us is that friar was developed from the Proto-Indo-European brater, meaning brother, and it went through various changes before it got to the word friar. But notice the connection with frère to friar. Okay, and notice how brother, meaning sibling, is derived from a different root. Another way of saying, writing a derivation of etymology is to turn it round. So you can start with the modern English friar, and notice the symbol is turned round, meaning derived from Middle English frère, derived from Old French frère, also member of religious order of brothers, and derived from Latin frater, derived from Proto-Indo-European brater. So do two different ways of writing it. But notice that's the kind of way we're going to write our etymologies. Okay, so we talked about Proto-Indo-European, or PIE, and just to remind you, this is not a real language, it's a reconstructed common ancestor of the Indo-European languages spoken by the Proto-Indo-Europeans. And that graphic is not easy to see, and you'll see that Proto-Indo-European is just one small part of all the different languages in the world. We can also talk about Proto-Germanic, and again, this is constructed by linguists, and it's making the assumption that there was one Germanic language from which other language derived. Okay, and that of course includes English. Now you can have a look at Proto-Indo-European. And again, this is one real small part of it. And as you can see, we're looking at language families. And so when we talk about etymology, often we can take a word back to PIE, Proto-Indo-European. Sometimes we can't. It derives from different places. If we can trace it back to Proto-Indo-European, then we really learned a lot about certain elements or words, of if it's a food, that was common all the way back at very early times. And if we look at Proto-Germanic, then we can see the breakdown here into East, North German, and then West German, and you can see how that language family is put together. So when we're looking at food, we go way beyond Indo-European, of course. We're going to be looking at Asian languages. We're going to be looking at American, South American languages, which reflect, of course, trade, and colonialism. And so etymology becomes a very important tool in understanding the history of the world and how cultures are influenced by other cultures. And finally, just to sort of put that in perspective, let's take a cognate, and we'll take the cognate night. And so you know that when you've studied French or Spanish or Italian or German, this is a word that you can kind of recognize pretty easily. And so there's a list of this word, and you could imagine how a word like this, of course, is important. It's a key word, night and day, and we can trace this word way back to Proto-European, and we can look at all its manifestations in all these different languages. Okay, so that's etymology, and we'll be doing a lot of activities with etymology as a way of understanding through food how cultures influence each other in terms of language, which reflects the larger patterns of trade, migration, colonialism.